I'm so glad you decided to be a part of a Connect group here at Connection Point Church. As we begin this fall series and we enter into these groups, we know you're getting to meet new people, you're doing things you've never done. For some of you, it may be that you just didn't see this coming. You didn't see yourself joining a group like this. If I'm really honest, I don't know that I ever saw myself recording a video like this. I just assumed we would purchase all these videos and not record them. And so this series is about overcoming the 7 greatest challenges that no one expects and everyone experiences. And so I have to be honest with you, I read this book by Carey Nieuwhof last summer called Didn't See It Coming. It's a book we're using for the series and for even the sermon series on Sundays. But the gist of it was, it came at a time in my life when I was wrestling with some stuff that were difficult for me. And this book helped me begin to see some things differently that maybe you can see differently as well. And so my hope is that maybe we can learn to live in a different state, in a better place as we walk through this series together. Because the reality is, sometimes we wake up and we realize we don't know how we got where we are, whether that's a literal place or a figurative place. And so we're trying to figure out, how do I get from where I am to where I want to be? And this series explores that. So in fact, this first week, we're talking about cynicism. And the question is, what is cynicism? And so Oxford Dictionary defines cynicism as this: an inclination to believe that people are motivated purely by self-interest, or skepticism. And so for many of us, no one plans to be cynical or skeptical. We don't wake up one day and say, I want to be known as cynical. I want to be the person that always sees the cup as half empty. I never want to be the person that sees the cup as half full. So instead, we say things like, I'm just a realist, when in reality, we're not. We're cynical. See, cynicism isn't just something that other people experience. It's something that sometimes we sense growing inside of us. And so I kind of asked this question: have you ever poured yourself into something, into someone, a relationship, a project at work, something that you gave everything you had, and at the end of it, you got burned? You feel like you got dismissed. You feel like you wasted time. You feel like at the end of that, it just wasn't worth it. And so you say to yourself, I'm never doing that again. That's the start of cynicism. It's this idea that because something happened to us once, we'll never let it happen again. And so cynicism often begins not because we are people who don't care, but cynicism often begins because we're people who do care. Or maybe life circumstances, we find ourselves that we know too much. We know too much backstory or too much other things, and we think, well, I'm just not going to be a part of that because I already know all the junk. And so we can't see it with anything hope-filled. Or maybe you are one of the people who does something like I've done before. You project past failures, whether yours or someone else's, onto new situations. And so you already have made the assumption that it can't work, that it isn't going to work, that it's not good enough. Or you just decided you're going to stop trusting, you're going to stop hoping, you're going to stop believing. And see, cynicism even infects, if I get the right word here, it even affects our relationship with God, because when you close your heart to people, you close your heart to God. See, Jesus is pretty clear that the way we love others is the way we love Him. And so when we harden our heart to other people or to situations, we're actually hardening our heart to God. And so Carey Nieuwhof in his book makes this observation that most of the older people he knows have landed on one side or the other of the balance line. They have either learned to be happy and grateful, or bitter and crotchety. And I don't know about you, whether I'm old or young, I don't want to be known as crotchety. It's not a word I want to describe me. And so what Carey began to understand is this: that cynicism is actually a choice. That we make a conscious and even sometimes unconscious decision to be cynical or not. But here's what's at stake. For you and I, are we going to change, or are we going to choose to be cynical? See, when we look in the scriptures, we think, well, who is cynical in the Bible? And the truth is, King Solomon is probably one of the most cynical people you'll ever read about. He did a lot of great things. He built the temple. He built this great palace, and he was considered one of the wisest people who's ever lived, and people would come to hear his wisdom. But Solomon also writes these words in Ecclesiastes chapter 1, where he said in verse 16, I said to myself, look, I have increased in wisdom more than anyone who has ruled over Jerusalem before me. I've experienced much of wisdom and knowledge. Then I applied myself to the understanding of wisdom and also of madness and folly. But I learned that this, too, is a chasing after the wind. For with much wisdom comes much sorrow. The more knowledge, the more grief. Earlier in the same chapter, Solomon says that there's nothing new under the sun. Solomon embraces cynicism with the best of them. But the reality is Solomon right? Is Solomon right that there's nothing new under the sun? Well, in truth, we know it was several hundred years later that Jesus came onto the scene, and he would say unequivocally that something new has come, that God has done a new thing. And in fact, I would say maybe the Apostle Paul is someone who epitomizes that cynicism may drive out hope, but when we find hope, hope does change everything. And see, Paul spells this out with his life. When Paul encountered Jesus, it changed everything that he lived for. See, Paul writes this kind of hopeful words we're going to read in just a second from Romans chapter 8. And Paul writes these hopeful words after he's been stoned, after he's been imprisoned, after he's been run out of multiple towns, after he's been dismissed as a crazy person. Paul, in the middle of all of that, he still finds hope because he's come to know the person of Jesus. And that does change everything. And so here's what Paul writes in Romans chapter 8. For I am convinced that neither death, nor life, neither angels, nor demons, neither the present, nor the future, nor any powers, neither height, nor depth, nor anything else in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God that is in Christ Jesus our Lord. And so what Paul's trying to say is this, that we destroy cynicism through our hope, through having faith in Jesus and beginning to have faith that people can and will change. But it's not their changing that we're worried about, it's ours. Because cynicism is really about our own hearts. It's about our own lives. So how do you and I then not become people who are cynical? And here's what Carey says in his book. He says this, that if we will choose curiosity, that we kick cynicism in the teeth. Curiosity of all things, what do you mean by being curious? Well, think about every 5 or 6-year-old kid you know, and they all ask one question, right? Or maybe two. They ask why. I mean, I know if you're around them very long and they say, well, why? Well, why dad? Well, why mom? Well, why Aunt Billy? Well, Uncle Susie, whatever it is. And I know I just mixed those up. It should have been the other way around, but who cares? But what we begin to find is this, that we ask the question, why or why not? When we begin to have curiosity, it does change everything. And so we begin to say, well, why? I wonder why the world does function that way. I wonder why they did respond that way. Or we say, why not? Why can't I do this? Why can't the world change? Why can't we see great things happen? Why can't my heart that was hard become soft? And so these are things that grow out of curiosity. And so Carey gives us 4 things that are helpful in terms of curiosity. When he says schedule thinking time, schedule time to just think, to just sit down and not be so busy. The second thing he says to ask open-ended questions. You know, we ask the question where we just say, well, what are you passionate about? And we learn from someone, and our curiosity seeps into what they have to say. The third thing he says is give fewer answers. I don't know if you're like me, but if you are, sometimes you assume people just want to know what you have to say. And often what I've found is they really don't care what I have to say. They would rather me just listen. And so what about you? What if you and I, we gave fewer answers, and we spent more time listening, and we were more open in our conversations, and we were more curious about what they had to say or where they were coming from? And the last thing, the 4th thing Carey gives is this. What if we dream more? See, I can't help but think, what if you and I were dreamers about what could happen if you and I truly embraced the love of Jesus? What could happen if you and I began to share that love in our everyday lives, in our workplaces, in our homes, in our schools? What if you and I became, as Walter Brueggemann says, prisoners of hope? See, if you and I will live into that, I really do think some of these obstacles that we see coming will be changed. And so maybe you're like me. Maybe there's been times when you've struggled with cynicism. Maybe you're just cynical that no one's going to change. But what if we choose to be people who are followers of Jesus and recognize that Jesus can change everything? And so our invitation for you this week is in your group is as you have these conversations, as you think about the difference between Solomon and his experiences and Paul and his experiences, or you think about the differences of whether you're cynical or whether you're hopeful, whether you're driven by cynicism or curiosity, you and I can choose to live a life that is not defined by cynicism. And the central thing to that is this. It requires the work of Jesus and our own effort to change our hearts and our minds and the way we think. So I hope you enjoyed this week's group together.